So my name is Shurtjong, and I work as evangelist in Europe for the Unreal Engine for Epic.
So let's talk a little about developing in VR. What is the new Unreal Editor VR opening up for creatives in the ability to stay in VR the entire time of development?
Mm-hmm. What we found out is that when you're working in VR, it's quite annoying in a way to always take off the headset and then you look at your screen and you turn it back on. I mean, it's pretty difficult to work like that, especially when you're trying to block out environments. And that's another thing, right? So when you make virtual environments, if you experience them in VR, it's completely different. The sense of scale is completely different. Everything suddenly looks bigger or too small. The scale really has to be completely correct. Some shapes maybe don't work, or maybe certain things make people nausea, right? And so if you can build the environment in a VR editor, it makes it a lot easier to see exactly what you're building, right? Because that's how people are going to experience it. So that's one of the things we want to accomplish. That we don't intend to make a VR toolkit right now that allows you to do everything. It's not going to replace the tools as they are, because there's a lot of things that are very difficult to do in VR. Imagine typing code. I mean, it's very difficult to do. But building an environment, that you can definitely do. And that's also one of the parts, again, where it's most helpful, because it immediately gives you the feedback. This is what we're building. This is how it's going to feel and look and feel in VR.
And is that something you learned from, for instance, Robo Recall they're developing in Cary? They did use the Unreal Editor VR for the first time, and they said they did use it very early on in the development process to build out the level.
Yeah, to get the feel again, to get that right feel for what kind of scale seems to work well for this kind of space. To get the composition, to really feel the environment. But it also has to be said, the VR editor is very early on in development. It's definitely not production ready. It's something that aids your development. It's not something that's going to replace your development, right? We're more building this as a way of experimenting with the whole functionality and the whole concept of it, so that in the years ahead we can move more towards perhaps doing more and more tools in VR. So it's more research right now and trying things out.
How do you see things evolving when you look at how quickly VR is evolving as a platform, as developers want to start being more immersed themselves during the development process?
I think there's a lot of potential, but there's a lot of challenges as well. For example, one of the problems with the current VR editor is that you have a reasonably heavy Vive, usually a Vive, on your head all day long. You wouldn't be able to work like that 8 hours. You wouldn't see any daylight for 8 hours. You start sweating, your face starts getting red. There's a lot of issues there. So I think where might be more potential is some kind of augmented reality environment, possibly mixed with traditional tools. So, because reinventing all of the traditional tools that we build out, not just in Unreal, but also Maya, for example, redoing all of that in VR, it's probably not going to happen. Not for a while, right? It's a huge job. But if you would be able to take the traditional tools and then blend them with some kind of augmented reality overlay or something else that works with it, then that would be a lot easier to get into. So imagine sitting in front of your desk, you have your regular screens and all that, but you have some kind of, HoloLens, whatever, style environment. You see part of the interface projected on your glasses or whatever you're wearing, but it's mixed with the traditional way of doing things. That might make it easier, right? So you can just look to your left and you can see like, oh, there's my material editor, and drag that in, or use the entire environment around you for the interface. I think there's a lot of potential there. Doing everything entirely in VR, in a closed VR environment, I'm not sure how that's going to go. Because I don't see people sitting in that environment 8 hours a day continuously.
Now that Microsoft does have the HoloLens developer kit out there, and people are using it, in enterprise, what does that open up for Unreal? Does that platform support Unreal 4 technology?
It's a bit early on still. The whole thing is a little bit more, it's a bit more still of a gimmick. But I think in the next 5 years, 10 years for sure, it's definitely going to catch on. And I can see that going mainstream. VR itself is a little bit harder to go mainstream. I mean, you can't sit at a bus stop waiting for your bus when you're done at work and put on a VR helmet. I mean, it doesn't work. Even if you get it mobile, you will get yourself killed or mugged, or something else will happen, right? But an augmented reality environment, that you can use it anywhere and everywhere. So I think there's a lot more potential there, but it's still too early on. Right now the device is not powerful enough, for example. The hardware thing is an issue, the resolution, all those things.
So outside of developing inside of VR, what are you seeing at this early stage of the creativity going on in the video game space with early Unreal Engine 4 developers?
For VR.
Yeah, for VR titles.
Yeah, I mean, VR in itself is awesome. The only thing is, I don't see it going mainstream right now, but in itself it's really, really cool. Like the first time I tried VR, and very simple things, or even I made my own game. You stand on the beach and you look at a rock, and you're amazed. And that's the only thing you do, right? Or you had one of those early demos where you have a whale swimming over, and it's nothing. And I mean, we've played so many games where something flew over you, or a whale, or swam over you. But in VR, suddenly everything is awesome. And it's so early on, there's so much potential with it, so many new possibilities. So there's a lot of developers doing really cool things with it, trying out lots of cool stuff. So yeah, I mean, I can see a lot of nice things happening. Also with film, for example.
Yeah, and talk a little about film, because for CGI, we're starting to see, we've seen the evolution of CGI on the big screen, but now all of a sudden we're seeing interactive, basically CGI movies like Invasion made with Unreal. What is that opening up creatively? How do you see video games and Hollywood filmmaking blending in VR?
I think it's probably going to blend ever more indeed. I mean, movies in general, with VR and non-VR, it's going to get ever more, computer generated, obviously, as has been happening, but ever more perhaps interactive as well, or more. You want to be part of it, right? You want to take the next step. With the movies as we've had them, they've been the same since the beginning of the 20th century. It's always a screen in front of you, you sit and you look at it. That's clearly going to change, and I think if you now look what's happening with VR, it opens up a lot of really interesting potential. Sitting in the movie, looking around, opens up a lot of challenges as well. For example, imagine you're in a movie. How do you force someone to look, for example, that way? If something is happening that way, how do you make someone look there? Because, for example, they might be looking there while the story takes place there, and they're missing part of the movie. So, but it's going to be very interesting times, yeah.
Yeah, mixed reality is the newest thing that they're working on. People like Magic Leap. Are you guys, as Unreal Technology, does that automatically work on platforms like a Magic Leap or a HoloLens and all these new augmented and mixed reality?
We have some support for it, but it's really too early on. Again, performance is a thing still, so it's going to come. It's going to develop further.
But the technology itself, the engine, it's been designed so that it's forward-thinking as things.
Yeah, absolutely, and it will absolutely work. But again, it's still early on, but there's a huge potential there, and we really believe in that potential of those augmented reality devices. We think that's going to be bigger than VR long run.
In general, right now you can make a game on PS4 and on Xbox One, on PC. VR, we're starting to see people develop across platforms on VR. How do you see AR evolving? Is it a completely different experience that you'd have to start from scratch? Or could you create something in VR and then have an offshoot in AR?
If you think of augmented reality in the sense of, well, seeing reality with something that's blended on top, then from that perspective you probably can't have the VR games as we have them right now. Because they are VR experiences. I mean, it's a completely different experience, nothing to do with reality anymore. So you probably need to have two completely, it's going to split up, right? You get VR games, you get augmented reality games.
I just wasn't sure
you will still get a few crossovers.
If you could create characters, for example, in VR, and then those characters could also exist.
Yeah, sure, you can still reuse assets and all that, but you can't just take the whole game and just put it there, right? You will get some games that are going to share things back and forth, or maybe they can switch, or are a little bit of both. But overall, I think you can have two distinctive tracks, as you have with PC as well. I mean, console gaming and PC gaming. The gaming experience as it is, the traditional 2D gaming experience, obviously different from VR. But you could reuse the content, but you can't just put a traditional game in VR and expect it to work. Same thing.
The other evolution we're seeing in gaming, as well as entertainment, is the leap to 4K in the living rooms. What impact is that having with games and experiences being developed with Unreal 4?
Unreal is made for that. You can already put it on 4K right now, or 8K. I don't think there's a resolution limit on Unreal. Not that I know. It's probably very high. It's mostly the hardware that's limiting you. And that's the general thing right now. You can totally create a 4K game on Unreal right now, but how many people have the hardware for it? That's the biggest challenge we have.
We're also seeing a push from TV makers now with high dynamic range. What does that open up for developers that are creating games with Unreal?
Again, we're supporting that already. You can even export it. We've been doing a lot of work on Sequencer, for example. You can export high dynamic range directly from that, so the movie formats and all that, for use in the pipeline in movie production. So all of that is already built in. It's all future proof.
So it's almost like you're waiting for the rest of the world to catch up to what's already in there.
In a way, yeah. But that's always how it goes, right? You always have to, wait for the mainstream, the public in general to catch up, the hardware to catch up.
We're right around the corner from CES in January, and they're already the big theme out of the consumer electronics industry is 8K. That's what they're going to be talking about. How big a leap do you see that from what we're already starting to see with 4K?
I think it's going to be interesting, but personally, I'd rather see us move to 4K first. I mean, we are not even there yet as a society, as the world in general. We aren't even using 4K yet. So, yeah, I think we still have some time to go. Yeah.